The congressional hearing room fell silent as Representative Jasmine Crockett pulled out a thick manila folder from her briefcase. Charlie Kirk, founder of Turning Point USA, sat at the witness table, his usual confidence radiating from his pressed navy suit and red tie. He had walked into this hearing expecting another routine grilling about campus conservative movements. What he didn't know was that Crockett had spent weeks preparing something that would completely shatter his composure. "Mr. Kirk," Crockett began, her voice steady and measured, "before we begin, I want to ask you something simple. Do you believe in transparency in political movements?" Kirk leaned into the microphone, a slight smirk crossing his face. "Of course, Representative. Turning Point USA has always operated with complete transparency. We have nothing to hide." The cameras from C-SPAN zoomed in as Crockett slowly opened the folder. "Nothing to hide? Then you won't mind if I read some of your private emails that have recently come to light?" The color drained from Kirk's face. His hands, which had been confidently folded on the table, suddenly gripped the edge. In that moment, everyone watching knew something explosive was about to happen. Before we dive deeper into this incredible confrontation, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss what happens when powerful political figures get exposed with their own words. Drop a comment below telling us where you're watching from. This story is spreading like wildfire across the nation. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Behind Kirk, his team of lawyers started whispering frantically. They hadn't been prepared for this. Nobody had told them about any email leaks. Kirk's usual spokesman confidence began to crack as he watched Crockett pull out the first page. "Let me read your email from March 15th, 2024, Crockett said, adjusting her glasses. "You wrote, and I quote, 'These college kids don't actually understand what we're selling them. They just like feeling rebellious. It's actually hilarious how easy they are to manipulate.'" Gasps erupted from the gallery. Several young people wearing Turning Point USA shirts looked at each other in shock. Kirk's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He reached for his water glass, his hand visibly shaking. That's taken out of context," Kirk stammered, his voice cracking slightly. "Oh, we're just getting started, Mr. Kirk," Crockett replied, her tone sharp as a blade. "Would you like me to provide the context? Because I have the entire email thread right here. To understand the gravity of this moment, you need to know who these two figures are and why this confrontation matters for American politics." Charlie Kirk, at just 30 years old, had built a conservative empire. Turning Point USA, his organization, claimed to have chapters on over 3,000 college campuses across America. With his boyish face and passionate speeches, Kirk had become a hero to young conservatives. He regularly appeared on Fox News, had millions of followers on social media, and was considered one of the most influential voices in the MAGA movement. His organization received millions in donations from wealthy conservatives who believed he was training the next generation of Republican leaders. Kirk had walked into this hearing with his usual swagger. He wore his expensive navy suit like armor, his red tie a bold statement of his political allegiance. His team had prepped him for the usual questions about campus free speech, conservative values, and student organizing. He'd done this dance dozens of times before. In his mind, this was just another opportunity to score points against the Democrats and create viral clips for social media. Representative Jasmine Crockett was a different kind of opponent than Kirk was used to facing. The freshman congresswoman from Texas had quickly made a name for herself with her sharp questioning and refusal to back down from confrontation. A former public defender and civil rights attorney, Crockett knew how to build a case and present evidence. She had spent her career fighting for the underdog, and she wasn't intimidated by powerful conservative figures. What Kirk didn't know was that Crockett had been investigating Turning Point USA for months. Her staff had been contacted by several former employees who were disturbed by what they'd witnessed inside the organization. These whistleblowers had provided Crockett with something explosive: access to Kirk's private email communications spanning several years. Crockett had spent weeks going through thousands of emails, carefully documenting the most damaging revelations. She had cross-referenced them with public statements Kirk had made, finding contradiction after contradiction. Her legal training had taught her how to build an airtight case, and she had applied those skills to this political confrontation. The stakes couldn't be higher. Turning Point USA wasn't just any conservative organization. It was the gateway for millions of young Americans into conservative politics. If Kirk was exposed as a fraud who manipulated his own followers, it could shake the entire youth conservative movement. For Democrats, this was a chance to expose what they saw as the hollow core of MAGA recruitment. For Republicans, Kirk's potential downfall could create a massive scandal just as the 2024 election season was heating up. The hearing room was packed with reporters, political operatives, and students from both sides of the political spectrum. Social media was already buzzing with clips from the opening exchange. Kirk emails was beginning to trend on Twitter, and political commentators were frantically pulling up live streams to watch in real time. Kirk's team behind him was in crisis mode. His chief of staff was furiously typing on his phone, likely trying to figure out how Crockett had gotten these emails. His lawyers were flipping through legal pads, searching for any procedural objection they could raise. But Kirk himself sat frozen at the witness table, his mind racing as he tried to remember what else might be in those emails. Crockett, meanwhile, was perfectly calm. She had the demeanor of a prosecutor who knew she had already won the case. Her staff had prepared meticulously for this moment. Every email had been verified, every quote double-checked. She had even prepared responses for the various defenses Kirk might attempt. This wasn't just a political stunt, it was a carefully orchestrated takedown. The committee chair, an elderly Democrat who had seen plenty of political theater in his decades in Congress, sensed the explosive nature of what was unfolding. He gabbled for order as the gallery continued to buzz with excitement. "Representative Crockett, you may continue your questioning," he said, though everyone knew this had already moved beyond simple questioning. This was an execution, and Charlie Kirk was about to face the political equivalent of a firing squad. Crockett lifted the second page from her folder, her movements deliberate and theatrical. Every eye in the room followed that piece of paper like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Mr. Kirk, let's move to your email from April 2nd, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hushed room. "You wrote to your major donors, and I'm quoting directly here, the beautiful thing about working with college students is they don't ask hard questions about where the money goes. They're just happy to get free MAGA hats and feel like they're part of something bigger." Kirk's face flushed red. "That's a complete mischaracterization of—" "I'm reading your exact words, Mr. Kirk," Crockett interrupted, holding up the printed email for the cameras to see. "Would you like me to read the rest of the paragraph where you joke about how one donor's $1 million contribution bought you a new vacation home?" The young Turning Point supporters in the gallery began shifting uncomfortably. Several pulled out their phones, likely searching for information about these allegations. Kirk's hands were now visibly trembling as he reached for his water glass again. "These are stolen documents," Kirk's lawyer suddenly interjected, standing up. "This is illegally obtained information that has no place in these proceedings." Crockett didn't even look at the lawyer. Her eyes remained locked on Kirk. "Mr. Chairman, these documents were provided by whistleblowers protected under federal law." Mr. Kirk's lawyer can file his objections later, but right now, the American people deserve to hear what Mr. Kirk really thinks about the young conservatives he claims to champion. The chairman nodded. "The witness will answer the questions. Counselor, please sit down." Kirk tried to compose himself, straightening his tie and leaning back into the microphone. "Representative Crockett, you're taking private communications out of context to create a false narrative. Turning Point USA has helped millions of young Americans find their political voice." "Their political voice?" Crockett's eyebrows raised. "Let's see what you really think about their political voice. May 10th email to your communications director. Had to sit through another chapter meeting today. These kids can barely form a coherent argument, but they sure can repeat talking points. I guess that's all we really need them for anyway." In a Turning Point t-shirt, in the gallery started crying. She quickly gathered her things and left the hearing room, followed by several others. Kirk watched them leave, his jaw clenched tight. "You're destroying young people's faith in political engagement," Kirk shot back, finally finding some of his famous combativeness. "This is exactly what the left does. Tear down anyone who threatens their monopoly on young voters." Crockett actually smiled at this. "Mr. Kirk, I'm not destroying anything. I'm simply reading your own words. If those words destroy young people's faith in your organization, perhaps you should have chosen them more carefully." She pulled out another email. June 22nd, subject line, Campus Strategy. You wrote, "Remember, we're not trying to create thinkers, we're creating soldiers. They don't need to understand the complexity of tax policy or foreign relations. They just need to own the libs and create viral content." The room erupted. Several committee members started talking at once. The gallery was in chaos, with supporters and detractors shouting at each other. The chairman had to gavel multiple times to restore order. Kirk was sweating now, visible beads forming on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His perfect hair was starting to come undone, a strand falling across his face. He looked nothing like the confident culture warrior who had walked in an hour ago. "Let me ask you directly, Mr. Kirk," Crockett continued once order was restored. "Do you actually believe in the conservative principles you preach, or is this all just a very lucrative performance?" Kirk's voice cracked as he responded. "I've dedicated my life to the conservative movement. Everything you've done has made you a very wealthy man," Crockett interrupted. "Should we discuss your email to your accountant about hiding speaking fees from your organization's board, or would you prefer I read the one where you call your own board members useful idiots with deep pockets?" Kirk's lawyer stood up again. "Mr. Chairman, this is harassment. My client needs a recess." But before the chairman could respond, Kirk suddenly slammed his hand on the table. "You want to destroy me? Fine. But you're destroying the dreams and hopes of millions of young conservatives across this country." "No, Mr. Kirk," Crockett replied calmly. "You destroyed those dreams the moment you decided to use their passion for your personal gain. I'm just showing them the truth." She pulled out another stack of papers, much thicker than the first. "We're not even halfway through, Mr. Kirk. Should we discuss your emails about deliberately recruiting students with financial problems because, and I quote, desperate kids are easier to control?" The committee room was electric with tension. CNN and Fox News had both cut to live coverage. Social media was exploding with reactions. Charlie Kirk exposed was now the #1 trending topic worldwide. Political commentators were having field days on Twitter, with conservatives trying to defend Kirk while progressives celebrated what they saw as the ultimate takedown. Kirk's phone, sitting face up on the witness table, was lighting up with constant notifications. His team behind him was in full crisis mode, with one aide actually running out of the room, phone pressed to his ear. But Kirk himself seemed to be shrinking in his chair, each new revelation hitting him like a physical blow. "August 3rd, Crockett continued relentlessly, "email to your top advisor. The beauty of the culture war stuff is that it costs nothing to produce and generates maximum outrage. These kids will fight to the death over pronouns and critical race theory while we cash the checks." A group of college Republicans in the gallery stood up to leave. One young man shouted, "We believed in you!" before being escorted out by security. Kirk flinched at the words like he'd been slapped. "September 15th, Crockett read on. Subject: California campus expansion. Quote, "Focus on recruiting the lonely kids, the ones who feel rejected by liberal campus culture. They're looking for belonging more than ideology. Give them a community and they'll believe anything we tell them." Kirk's hands were now shaking so badly he could barely hold his water glass. When he tried to take a sip, he spilled water on his papers. The image of him frantically dabbing at the spill with his pocket square, while Crockett watched impassively, would become one of the defining images of the hearing. "Do you deny writing these emails, Mr. Kirk?" Crockett asked directly. Kirk looked at his lawyers, who seemed to have no good advice to offer. He was trapped. Denying the emails would open him up to perjury charges if they could be authenticated. Admitting to them would destroy his reputation forever. "I want to invoke my Fifth Amendment rights," Kirk finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. The room exploded again. In congressional hearings, invoking the Fifth was essentially an admission of guilt in the court of public opinion. Crockett had gotten exactly what she wanted. "Your Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination," Crockett repeated, making sure everyone heard it clearly. "Very well, Mr. Kirk. But before you hide behind the Constitution you claim to defend, let me share one more email with the American people." She pulled out a final sheet of paper. "October 1st, just 3 weeks ago, you wrote to your inner circle, 'The congressional hearing is coming up. They have no idea what we really do here. These politicians are almost as gullible as the college kids. We'll put on a show, talk about freedom and patriotism, and walk out with more donations than ever." Kirk's face went from red to white. He hadn't realized that email had been leaked too. That was from his most secure encrypted account. If they had that, what else did they have? "Well, Mr. Kirk," Crockett said, leaning back in her chair, "how's that show working out for you now?" The hearing room was dead silent for a moment after Crockett's last question. Then, like a dam breaking, everything erupted at once. Kirk suddenly stood up from his chair, his face contorted with rage and desperation. "This is a witch hunt!" he shouted, his voice cracking with emotion. "This is exactly what the radical left does. They can't beat us on ideas, so they resort to stolen documents and character assassination." But, as he spoke, his voice broke completely. The confident spokesperson who had walked in was gone, replaced by someone who looked very young and very scared. Tears actually began forming in his eyes as the reality of his situation hit him. Crockett remained perfectly composed. She had one more card to play, and it would be the most devastating of all. "Mr. Kirk, before you continue claiming this is a witch hunt, there's something else the committee needs to see." She nodded to her aide, who began distributing tablets to the committee members. "These are video recordings from your private leadership meetings. Your own staff recorded them because they were so disturbed by what they witnessed. The main screen in the hearing room lit up with video footage. There was Kirk at what appeared to be a luxury resort, addressing his leadership team. Listen carefully," Kirk's voice came through the speakers. "Our job is not education, it's activation. I don't care if these kids can't name 3 Supreme Court justices, care if they can trend a hashtag and trigger liberals on campus. That's what the donors pay for, and that's what we deliver." The video continued. "The moment one of these students starts actually thinking critically about our positions, they become a liability. That's why we keep them busy with events and protests. A busy activist doesn't have time to question what they're actually fighting for." In the hearing room, Kirk collapsed back into his chair. His lawyer was whispering urgently in his ear, but Kirk wasn't listening. He was watching his entire world crumble on national television. The video switched to another clip. This time, Kirk was in his office, talking to someone off camera. The beautiful irony is that we're using their idealism against them. They think they're fighting for conservative principles. They're actually just making me and the board incredibly wealthy. "You should see my new boat. Bought it with the proceeds from our Campus Freedom Tour." These kids paid $30 each to hear me tell them what they already believe. Crockett paused the video. "Mr. Kirk, that boat cost $3 million. It was purchased through a shell company linked to Turning Point USA donations. Would you like to explain to your student supporters how their pizza money funded your yacht?" Kirk's response was barely audible. "I want my lawyer." "You have your lawyer right next to you," Crockett pointed out. "But he can't help you explain away your own words, can he?" She turned to address the gallery and the cameras. "What we're witnessing here is not just the exposure of one man's hypocrisy. This is about the systematic manipulation of young Americans who genuinely believe they were part of a movement. These students gave their time, their money, and their passion to someone who saw them as nothing more than, in his own words, useful idiots." The final video clip began playing. It was recent, from just a week before the hearing. Kirk was on a phone call, unaware he was being recorded. "The congressional hearing?" Kirk's recorded voice said. "Crockett's an idiot. She'll ask some gotcha questions. I'll give my prepared answers, and we'll fundraise off the clip of me destroying her. These Democratic representatives are so predictable, she has no idea what she's walking into." The irony was perfect. Crockett let the silence hang in the air for a moment before speaking again. "No, Mr. Kirk, you had no idea what you were walking into." At that moment, Kirk completely broke down. Tears were streaming down his face as he realized the full extent of his exposure. His carefully crafted image, his multi-million-dollar organization, his influence over millions of young conservatives, it was all crashing down in real time. I need a recess," Kirk managed to say through his tears. "Please, I need a recess." The chairman looked at Crockett, who nodded. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," he announced. As Kirk was led out by his team, he looked broken. His suit was disheveled, his face was red and blotchy, and he could barely walk straight. The confident young conservative leader who had entered the room was gone, replaced by someone who had just lost everything. In the gallery, young conservatives were crying, angry, and confused. Some were on their phones, likely deleting their Turning Point USA affiliations from their social media profiles. Others were calling their campus chapters, spreading the word about what they'd just witnessed, but Crockett wasn't done. As people started to move around during the recess, she spoke up again. "Oh, and Mr. Kirk, when we return, we'll be discussing your emails about the January 6th rally, the ones where you discussed busing in students and, quote, making sure things get wild enough for the cameras." I'm sure your supporters would love to hear about that. Kirk, who had almost made it to the door, stumbled and had to be caught by his aide. The implications of what Crockett had just revealed sent another shockwave through the room. If she had evidence linking Kirk to January 6th planning, this wasn't just about reputation anymore. This could involve criminal charges. During the recess, the political world exploded. Fox News cut to commercial and came back with a panel of conservatives distancing themselves from Kirk. If these allegations are true, this is deeply troubling, one commentator said. Even the most ardent Trump supporters were struggling to defend Kirk. On CNN, the tone was one of vindication. This is what we've been saying all along, one analyst said. The youth conservative movement is built on manipulation and grift, not genuine political principles. Social media was in meltdown. Charlie Kirk meltdown was trending worldwide. Videos of Kirk crying were already being turned into memes. Young conservatives were posting long threads about feeling betrayed and manipulated. Some shared their own stories of giving money they couldn't afford to Turning Point USA, thinking they were supporting a cause that mattered. Major conservative donors were releasing statements distancing themselves from Kirk and Turning Point USA. Several announced they were launching investigations into how their donations had been used. The organization's board called an emergency meeting, with rumors swirling that they were preparing to remove Kirk as president. When the hearing resumed, Kirk looked even worse. His eyes were red and puffy, his hair was a mess, and his hands shook uncontrollably. He had clearly been crying throughout the entire recess. Crockett resumed her questioning with surgical precision. Mr. Kirk, let's discuss your communications regarding January 6th. On December 28, 2020, you wrote, "We need bodies in D.C. I don't care what we have to tell these kids to get them there. Promise them they're saving democracy. Promise them they'll be part of history. Promise them anything. We need the visual of young people standing up for Trump." Kirk's lawyer tried to object, but Kirk himself waved him off. He seemed to have given up fighting. And on January 4th, 2 days before the Capitol riot, you wrote, "Make sure our people are at the front. If things go sideways, we need maximum coverage. This is our chance to show the establishment that young conservatives won't be silenced." The implications were staggering. Kirk had potentially sent young people into danger for the sake of optics and media coverage. Several parents in the gallery began crying, possibly thinking of their own children who had attended the January 6th rally with Turning Point USA. "My son was there," one mother shouted from the gallery. "My son was arrested because of you." The chairman had to gavel for order again, but the damage was done. Kirk was now not just exposed as a grifter, but potentially as someone who had knowingly put young people in harm's way. Crockett delivered her final blow with the precision of a seasoned prosecutor. "Mr. Kirk, I have one last email to share. January 7th, 2021, the day after the Capitol riot. You wrote to your crisis management team, 'We need to distance ourselves from this immediately. Delete everything, make sure none of this traces back to us. Those kids who got arrested, they're on their own. We can't afford to be associated with them now.'" The mother who had shouted earlier broke down completely, sobbing loudly as others tried to comfort her. Kirk couldn't even look up from the table. "You abandoned them," Crockett said, her voice filled with genuine emotion for the first time. "These young people who believed in you, who trusted you, who followed your lead when they needed you most, you abandoned them to save yourself." The complete destruction of Charlie Kirk wasn't just personal. It sent shockwaves through the entire conservative movement. Within minutes of Crockett's final revelation, the political landscape began shifting dramatically. Kirk sat at the witness table, completely broken. His lawyer whispered urgently in his ear, likely advising him about potential criminal liability. But Kirk seemed beyond caring. He stared blankly at the table, occasionally wiping tears from his eyes. The man who had built an empire on confidence and confrontation had been reduced to a shell of his former self. Representative Crockett, maintaining her composure despite the emotional intensity of the moment, turned to address the committee and the viewing public. "What we've witnessed today is not just the exposure of one individual's deception," she began, her voice carrying the weight of the moment. "This is about the systematic exploitation of young Americans' political passion for personal gain. Mr. Kirk didn't just betray his followers' trust, he weaponized their idealism against them." The committee chairman, clearly moved by what had unfolded, spoke up. Kirk, do you have anything to say in response to these revelations? Kirk slowly raised his head. His voice was hoarse and broken when he spoke. I started out believing in this. I really did, but somewhere along the way, the money, the influence, the power, it became about me, not the movement. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry to everyone I misled, but his apology fell on deaf ears. The young conservatives in the gallery who had stayed were stone-faced. The betrayal was too fresh, too raw. One young man stood up and removed his Turning Point USA pin, dropping it on the floor before walking out. Others followed suit, creating a powerful visual of abandonment. Within an hour of the hearing's conclusion, the consequences began cascading. Turning Point USA's board of directors released an emergency statement announcing Kirk's immediate suspension pending a full investigation. They tried to distance the organization from Kirk personally, but the damage was done. The organization was Kirk, and Kirk was the organization. Major donors began pulling funding immediately. The Koch network announced a complete cessation of support. Corporate sponsors fled like rats from a sinking ship. Within hours, Turning Point USA had lost over 80% of its committed funding for the next year. Fox News, where Kirk had been a regular contributor, announced he was no longer affiliated with the network. His scheduled appearances were canceled, his contributor contract terminated. Other conservative media outlets followed suit, recognizing that association with Kirk was now toxic. The legal ramifications began almost immediately. The Department of Justice announced they were reviewing the January 6th related emails for potential criminal charges. The IRS announced an audit of Turning Point USA's tax-exempt status. Multiple state attorneys general launched investigations into potential fraud related to fundraising, but perhaps the most significant impact was on the young conservatives Kirk had claimed to represent. Across the country, Turning Point USA chapters began disbanding. Students felt betrayed, manipulated, and used. Many posted emotional videos on social media describing how they had given time and money they couldn't afford to an organization they believed in, only to discover it was all a scam. A young woman from Arizona posted a video that went viral within hours. I gave up relationships with family members to defend Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. I lost friends because I believed in what he was preaching. To find out he was laughing at us behind our backs, that he thought we were stupid and easy to manipulate. I don't know if I can ever trust political movements again. The video captured the real tragedy of Kirk's deception. The disillusionment of young people who had genuinely wanted to engage in political activism. Mental health hotlines reported increased calls from young conservatives struggling to process the betrayal. Representative Crockett held a press conference after the hearing, surrounded by former Turning Point USA members who had come forward as whistleblowers. This isn't about celebrating the destruction of a conservative organization, she said. This is about protecting young people from exploitation, regardless of their political beliefs. Every young American deserves to have their political passion respected, not exploited for someone else's financial gain. One of the whistleblowers, a former Turning Point employee, spoke briefly. I joined because I believed in conservative principles. What I found was a grift operation that viewed students as marks, not activists. Charlie didn't just steal money, he stole hope and idealism from thousands of young people. The conservative movement scrambled to contain the damage. Established Republican leaders tried to distance themselves from Kirk, claiming they had always had concerns about his methods. But the damage to youth conservative organizing was severe. Parents who had supported their children's involvement in conservative activism were now suspicious of any organization trying to recruit on campus. Senator Ted Cruz, trying to salvage something from the wreckage, issued a statement. What Charlie Kirk did was wrong, but we cannot let one bad actor destroy the important work of engaging young conservatives. The movement is bigger than any one person. But his words rang hollow to the thousands of young people who felt personally betrayed. Social media was flooded with stories of students who had sacrificed for Turning Point USA, missing family events to attend rallies, donating money meant for textbooks, damaging relationships to defend the organization. The financial investigation revealed the true extent of Kirk's grift. While claiming to run a grassroots student organization, Kirk had been paying himself a salary of over $500,000, 0 cents a year, plus bonuses that pushed his compensation over $1 million annually. He owned multiple properties, luxury cars, and that infamous yacht, all while telling students that every dollar donated went to fighting for freedom on campus. legal experts began discussing potential class action lawsuits from donors who felt defrauded. Criminal charges seemed increasingly likely, especially related to the January 6th revelations. Kirk's empire, built over years, had crumbled in a single afternoon. Charlie Kirk himself seemed to completely unravel in the days following the hearing. His social media accounts went dark. Reports emerged that he had checked into a mental health facility, unable to cope with the complete destruction of his reputation and career. His engagement was called off when his fiancée discovered emails where he had mocked her to his friends. His own family distanced themselves, with his father releasing a statement expressing disappointment and shame. The ripple effects continued for weeks. Other conservative youth organizations faced increased scrutiny. Parents demanded transparency about how donations were used. Students became more skeptical of any political organization claiming to represent their interests. Universities that had fought to keep Turning Point USA off campus felt vindicated. Several released statements highlighting how they had tried to warn students about the organization's manipulative tactics. Academic studies were launched to examine how political organizations exploit young people's idealism for profit. The Democratic Party tried to capitalize on the scandal, with party leaders arguing it proved the hollow nature of conservative youth outreach. "This isn't about ideology," one senator said. "It's about protecting young people from predators who see their political passion as a commodity to be exploited." But more thoughtful voices emerged from both sides, recognizing the broader implications. The Kirk scandal had exposed vulnerabilities in how political movements engage with young people. The need for transparency, accountability, and genuine respect for youth activism became a bipartisan concern. Mental health professionals began discussing the psychological impact of political betrayal on young people. The Kirk scandal became a case study in how trusted figures can exploit idealism and the lasting damage such betrayal can cause. Support groups formed for former Turning Point members struggling to process their experience. 6 months after the hearing, a comprehensive report revealed the full extent of the damage. Turning Point USA had effectively ceased to exist as a national organization. Dozens of lawsuits had been filed. Kirk faced multiple criminal charges related to fraud and his involvement in January 6th. His personal assets were frozen, his properties seized. But the real legacy of the Kirk exposure wasn't legal or financial. It was the thousands of young conservatives who had lost faith in political engagement. Studies showed a significant drop in youth conservative activism following the scandal. Many young people who had been active in politics withdrew entirely, too hurt and disillusioned to engage again. Representative Crockett reflected on the hearing in an interview months later. "I take no joy in what happened to Charlie Kirk. But when someone exploits young people's idealism for personal gain, they must be held accountable. My hope is that this serves as a warning to anyone else who might think about manipulating young Americans' political passion for profit." The Kirk scandal became a cautionary tale taught in political science classes. How someone could build such a massive following while harboring such contempt for his supporters. How the desire for belonging and purpose could be weaponized. How social media and modern technology enabled grifts on an unprecedented scale. Former Turning Point members formed their own organization focused on transparency and genuine grassroots activism. They implemented strict financial oversight, term limits for leadership, and regular audits. "We learned the hard way what happens when you trust without verifying," one founder said. Charlie Kirk himself became a pariah, unable to show his face in public without being confronted by former supporters. His attempts at a comeback were met with universal rejection. The man who had once commanded stages across America was reduced to posting defensive videos to an ever-shrinking audience on obscure platforms. The final irony came when Kirk's own emails revealed his true feelings about his downfall. In a message to his former assistant sent just days after the hearing, he wrote, "I guess I got what I deserved. I spent years telling these kids to own the libs and never thought I'd be the one getting owned. Crockett destroyed me with my own words. I played with fire and got burned." The story of Charlie Kirk's complete destruction at the hands of Representative Jasmine Crockett became one of the most dramatic political downfalls in modern American history. It wasn't just the exposure of hypocrisy or financial impropriety. It was the revelation of complete contempt for the very people who had elevated Kirk to prominence. The hearing footage became required viewing in political communication courses, a masterclass in how to methodically destroy an opponent using their own words against them. Crockett's calm, prosecutorial approach, contrasted with Kirk's emotional breakdown, became iconic, spawning countless memes and video remixes. But beyond the political theater, the Kirk exposure raised fundamental questions about political organizing in the digital age. How do we protect young people's idealism from exploitation? How do we ensure transparency in political movements? How do we rebuild trust once it's been so thoroughly shattered? The young conservatives Kirk had betrayed slowly began to re-engage with politics, but with a much more skeptical eye. They demanded transparency, questioned motives, and refused to be treated as mere foot soldiers in someone else's war. In a strange way, Kirk's betrayal had taught them a valuable lesson about power, manipulation, and the importance of holding leaders accountable. Representative Crockett continued her work in Congress, but the Kirk hearing remained her most famous moment. She received thousands of letters from young people thanking her for exposing the truth even if it hurt. She became an advocate for youth political engagement, working across party lines to create protections for young activists. The conservative movement eventually recovered from the Kirk scandal, but it was forever changed. New leaders emerged who understood that respecting young people's intelligence and passion wasn't just morally right, it was politically necessary. The days of treating youth activists as easily manipulated pawns were over. Charlie Kirk's name became synonymous with political grifting. "Don't go full Kirk" became slang for destroying your own credibility through greed and hubris. His spectacular fall from grace served as a warning to anyone who might think about exploiting political movements for personal gain. In the end, the Charlie Kirk scandal wasn't just about one man's corruption. It was about the vulnerability of idealism in an age of cynicism, the power of truth in an era of deception, and the importance of protecting young people's political passion from those who would exploit it. The hearing room where it all happened became something of a political landmark. Tour guides would point to the witness chair where Kirk broke down, the desk where Crockett had methodically laid out her evidence. It was a reminder that in democracy, even the most powerful voices can be held accountable by the truth. As one political historian wrote, the Kirk-Crockett hearing was more than political theater, it was a morality play for the digital age. It showed that in the end, authenticity matters, truth prevails, and those who exploit others' idealism will eventually face justice. The young people Kirk had manipulated went on with their lives, many becoming successful activists, lawyers, politicians, and community leaders. They carried with them the hard-learned lesson that passion without skepticism is vulnerability, that leaders must be held accountable, and that true political engagement requires both heart and mind. And somewhere in a small apartment far from the spotlight he once craved, Charlie Kirk lived with the knowledge that he had traded everything, reputation, wealth, influence, and purpose, for a grift that ultimately consumed him. His story became a cautionary tale whispered in political circles, the man who had everything and lost it all, because he couldn't resist exploiting the very people who believed in him. If you made it through this entire explosive story, you're witnessing one of the most dramatic political takedowns in modern history. Hit that subscribe button right now and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next shocking political revelation. Comment below with your thoughts on Charlie Kirk's downfall. Did he get what he deserved, or did Crockett go too far? Like this video if you believe in holding political leaders accountable, and share it with anyone who needs to see how power and deception ultimately lead